Margaret stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning light filter through the maple trees. At 62, she learned that some of life's greatest pleasures were the quiet honors or warm cup of coffee, the birds at the feeder, the predictable rhythm of her days. She lived in this house for 30 years, raised her children here, said goodbye to her husband here. 5 years ago now, the neighborhood had changed around her, but she'd stayed, finding comfort in familiar rooms and memories woven into every corner. This morning, though, something was different. A moving truck sat in front of the house next to the old Peterson place. Margaret had watched it sit empty for months, the garden growing wild, paint peeling from the shutters. She'd felt a strange kinship with that house, both of them weathering time alone. Now someone new was arriving. Margaret sipped her coffee and watched. A young man emerged from a car, maybe 35, with kind eyes and an easy smile. He helped an elderly woman from the passenger seat, moving slowly, patiently, his hand steady at her elbow. The woman moved carefully, leaning on a walker. Margaret could see the determination in her posture, the way she lifted her chin as she looked up at the house. There was dignity there, and something else, perhaps uncertainty, perhaps hope. Margaret recognized that look. She'd worn it herself after James died. The morning passed. Margaret tried to focus on her crossword puzzle, her book, the laundry that needed folding. But her eyes kept drifting to the window, watching the careful choreography of moving day next door. The young man made countless trips, always pausing to check on the older woman, who sat on the porch steps, supervising with quiet authority. By afternoon, Margaret had made a decision. She baked banana bread that morning as she always baked on Tuesdays, and it seemed only neighborly to share. Her hands trembled slightly as she knocked on the door. She hadn't done this in years, hadn't reached out, hadn't tried to connect. It was easier, somehow, to stay in her own world. The young man answered, his face lighting up with genuine warmth. Hello. You must be from next door. I'm David. Please, come in. Mom will be so happy to meet you. Margaret stepped inside, clutching her bread plate. I'm Margaret. I've lived next door for, well, quite a while now. I thought you might enjoy something homemade after all that moving. That's incredibly kind. David's voice held real gratitude, not just politeness. Mom, we have a visitor. The elderly woman appeared in the doorway, moving slowly with her walker. Up close, Margaret could see she was perhaps 75, with silver hair pulled back in a soft bun and eyes that sparkled with intelligence despite their weariness in her frame. I'm Eleanor, she said, her voice strong and warm. And if that's banana bread, you've just become my favorite person in this town. Margaret laughed, surprised by how good it felt. It is indeed my grandmother's recipe. They sat in the cluttered living room, boxes stacked around them like a cardboard city. David made tea, and Eleanor asked Margaret about the neighborhood with genuine interest. Not just the polite questions of strangers, but real curiosity of what the winters were like, where the best grocery store was, whether the local library was any good. I'm a reader, Eleanor explained, her eyes brightening. Always have been. David worries I have too many books, but I tell him a house without books is no home at all. I feel exactly the same way, Margaret said softly. She hadn't realized how much she missed these real conversation, the simple pleasure of being understood. As Margaret stood to leave, Eleanor reached out and gently touched her hand. Thank you for this. For coming over. Moving is harder than I expected, and not just physically. It takes courage to start over, even when it's necessary. Margaret met her eyes and saw something that she recognized, a resilience mixed with vulnerability, strength earned through difficulty. If you need anything, she heard herself say, anything at all, I'm right next door. She meant it. The weeks that followed brought a rhythm Margaret hadn't anticipated. She found herself checking on Eleanor, just small things at first, bringing over soup, sharing her newspaper, offering to pick up groceries when she went to the store. Eleanor never asked for help, but she accepted it with grace, and she gave back in ways that surprised Margaret. A listening ear when Margaret mentioned missing her husband. Recommendations for the books that Eleanor thought she'd enjoy. Stories about her own life, told with humor and wisdom earned over decades. One afternoon, Margaret found Eleanor in tears in her garden. She'd been trying to plant flowers, something she'd always loved, but her hands wouldn't cooperate the way they once had. Margaret sat down beside her in the dirt, not caring about her clean pants. Tell me what you want, she said gently. I'll be your hands. Together, they planted marigolds and petunias, Eleanor directing, Margaret digging. The sun was warm on their shoulders, and they worked in comfortable silence, occasionally punctuated by Eleanor's instructions or Margaret's questions. I had a garden at our old house, Eleanor said quietly, a big one. I had to leave it behind when I got sick. David wanted me closer to him, closer to good doctors. I understood, but, her voice trailed off. But you lost something, Margaret finished. Something that mattered. Yes, Eleanor whispered. That exactly. Margaret sat back on her heels, looking at the small plot they'd been working. Then we'll make this garden beautiful. We'll make it yours. And they did. Through the summer, Margaret and Eleanor transformed that neglected yard. Margaret provided the physical strength, Eleanor the knowledge and vision. They talked as they were kiddo about children and grandchildren, about losses and hopes, about the unexpected shape their lives had taken. David would come home from work to find them there, dirt under their nails, laughing at some shared joke. He'd bring them a lemonade and sit with them for a while, his face showing relief and something deeper, a gratitude that his mother had found not just a neighbor, but a friend. One evening in late August, as the three of them sat on Eleanor's porch watching fireflies dance across the lawn, Eleanor took Margaret's hand. "You've given me such a gift," she said softly. "I was so afraid, moving here, afraid of being alone, of being a burden to David, of losing myself in mile imitations. But you've shown me something important." Margaret waited, feeling the weight of Eleanor's thin hand in hers. "You've shown me that kindness isn't about fixing everything. It's about showing up, about being present, about helping someone plant flowers when they can't do it alone." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "You've given me a gift too. I'd forgotten how to reach out, how to let people in. After James died, I just closed down. You reminded me that life is still worth living, still worth sharing." David cleared his throat, his own eyes bright. "You've both reminded me of something I'd forgotten too. That getting older doesn't mean getting smaller. My mum isn't just someone who needs care. She's still fully herself, still growing, still blooming, especially when she has the right soil and sunlight." They sat together as darkness fell, three people who'd found each other across the divide of years and circumstance. The garden before them was alive with possibility, and so, Margaret realized, were they. Autumn came, bringing cooler days and golden light. Margaret and Eleanor adapted, spending more time inside, working on puzzles, reading together, sharing the quiet companionship that needed no words. Margaret had lived alone for 5 years, believing she preferred it that way, that it was easier than risking connection and loss again. But Eleanor had shown her something different, that the risk of caring was always worth it, that kindness received was kindness that must be passed forward, that it's never too late to bloom. The garden they'd planted together still flourished, a testament to what two people could create when they combined their strengths, accepted their limitations, and chose connection over isolation. Sometimes, Margaret thought, the greatest adventures aren't about going somewhere new. They're about opening the door when someone knocks, about showing up with banana bread and an open heart, about being willing to plant seeds even when you're not sure you'll see them bloom. The house next door wasn't empty anymore, and neither, Margaret realized, was her heart.